More top stories before you go. The blast of winter we've experienced over the last few days carrying over into some school delays this morning. A handful of local school districts are starting 2 hours late, including Ashland, Greenwood, Louisville, and Plattsmouth. Hundreds of people made their voices heard in Omaha after an ICE agent shot and killed a man in Minneapolis. They called for reform and accountability. There was zero interaction with law enforcement and no violence. Local politicians reacting to the shooting. Nebraska Senator Pete Ricketts says he expects a prioritized, transparent investigation. Meanwhile, Mayor Ewing asked residents to deepen our commitments to one another as human beings. Omaha police now say alcohol is considered a factor in a crash that put 4 people in the hospital over the weekend. It happened on I-480 between Martha and Vinton. OPD says an SUV left the road and hit a light pole. Lawmakers begin a final push to avoid another government shutdown later today. 7 departments are set to run out of money if lawmakers don't pass funding bills by Friday.